We've been talking about missions all month long. We're going to continue as we wrap up our series called A Summer's Journey, talking about Paul's missionary journeys. And as we begin today, I want to ask you this question. Who are the people in your life who have permission to tell you that you're wrong? Who have permission to tell you that you're wrong? I'm not talking about the people that will, whether you want them to or not. I'm talking about the people who have permission that you gave them to check you when you're out of line. I'm going to guess that list is a fairly small list, is it not? It is for me, and I would be surprised if it's not for you. We had this conversation 13 lifetimes ago, all the way back in February, in our 50s plus Bible study. You guys remember February? That was the same year, I think, as this year, allegedly, okay? But there are some people in your life, their words carry more weight than everybody else's, yeah? Look, when they talk, they have your attention. And here's what I know is true about them. You've been through some stuff together. They have a close, personal relationship with you. Now, there are plenty of people in all of our lives who are free with their opinion, and we know what they think about everything because they are the expert. Just ask them, they will tell you. Okay, but their words don't really carry all that much weight. It's not that we don't care what they think, but we're probably not losing a lot of sleep over it either. You know, if a random person on the street comes up to me and says, hey, your life's a mess, you need to get it together, they might be right, okay? And it might be true, but I might ignore it too. But if my wife walks up to me and says, hey, you need to pay attention to this, now you have my attention. And yes, there are more people on my list than just my wife, but she's my favorite. So that's the example that I'm going to use this morning, okay? On occasion, rare, but okay. On occasion, she'll come up to me and she'll lovingly point out that I need to pay attention to something. Maybe I'm not handling something well with the kids. Or maybe I need to pay a little more attention to what I'm doing if I want to hit the goals that I've set for myself. Or even something here at the church isn't going the way that it needs to be going. She'll say, I think you really should probably pay attention to this over here. And those are difficult conversations to have. They're not really fun, if I'm being honest with you, but I appreciate them. I appreciate them so much. And those conversations usually result in a change in my life. She loves me enough to tell me when there's something in my life that needs attention. And this isn't something that most of us do very well, is it? It's not something that we do very well. Because what happens is we typically fall into one of two categories. Most of us fall into either the category of we're going to avoid confrontation at all costs, or we could probably dial it back a few notches. Okay? Either we go way out of our way to ensure that we never have confrontation with anyone. We never want to offend anyone. The worst thing in the world would be, what if they get mad at me? So I'm just going to be quiet. Or we scream into the void on social media about every single thing in the universe, and we hope that the person that we really want to talk to understands the cryptic, passive-aggressive post that we just made. Yeah? Well, we know that neither one of those things is helpful. We know that neither one of those things is effective, but it's a lot easier to fit into one of those two categories, isn't it? Than to have the hard conversation with an individual. So that's what most of us opt for, is we know how difficult it is to get to know somebody on such a personal level that they ask you, hey, would you pay attention to my life and tell me when things start to get out of whack? It's difficult to get to know somebody so well that they give you permission to speak into their lives. That's the reason that we opt for one of these other options of either just being quiet or blasting out messages on social and hoping that the right person figures out what we're trying to say. But if we're honest with ourselves, we know that neither one of those things has ever changed our mind on something, has it? When was the last time you were scrolling through social media and you saw this angry rant and you're like, you know what? They have a point. It's never happened, has it? It's never happened. The things that shape us are when the people that we know love us, pull us aside and have a conversation with us. And they say, I love you. You need to watch out for this. That's the things that shapes our lives. And we appreciate those people. in our lives, the ones that are willing to challenge us in a loving and healthy way. You know why? Because even though those conversations aren't fun, I've never enjoyed one of those. But even though we don't enjoy them, we know that we're better people because those people are in our lives and love us enough to tell us the truth. And this is where sharing the gospel gets a little tricky too, isn't it? Because it's a simple message, but the gospel has always been countercultural. And when it's believed and when it's lived, it changes who we are. It changes what we do. It changes us, and therefore it changes society. But whenever we ask people to change, we should expect resistance, should we not? Because we don't like to change. Because I like what I'm doing. If I didn't like what I was doing, I would do something else. So what are you going to do? You come over here and tell me I need to change the way that I'm living my life? You're going to face resistance when you do that. This has always been true. And we've been talking all month long about Paul's missionary journeys. We talked about how the gospel's for everybody, even the people we don't like, even the people that don't like us, the people that think and live differently than we do. We talked about how we need to know the culture if we're going to reach the culture. But here's the thing, reaching the culture requires you to challenge it, and that doesn't always go super smoothly. When Paul did this, it happened all the time. The message of the gospel created what you might call social disruption. Throughout Paul's journeys, there were instances where the entire society was flipped upside down. There were angry mobs. There were all kinds of things. Remember that time in Acts 16 where there was the little girl who had a demon and she could tell the future? And she was following Paul around. And he got annoyed with it and he turned around and he cast the demon out. And the people that owned this little girl, they were not happy. Why? Well, they were making money. They said, well, she can tell the future, and people want to know the future, and they'll pay good money for that. And you're over here messing with my bottom line, and here's what I know. This has always been true. When you start messing with people's profit and loss, they get big mad real quick, don't they? That's what happened. That's what happened. And a similar instance happened in Ephesus, which is what we're going to talk about today. And this was led by a silversmith named Demetrius. Paul's teachings against idols threatened his business of selling idols, okay, in the temple of Artemis. So Demetrius, he gathered everybody who did that. He gathered the union boys together, and he said, listen, we got to get this guy out of town because he's threatening the bottom line. And we find this in Acts chapter 19. So if you have your Bible, go ahead and open it up there. To Acts chapter 19, we're going to begin in verse 23. You can follow along in the YouVersion Bible app as well. Hit the event tab and look for Swiss Cove. Acts chapter 19, beginning in verse 23. Here's what we read. About that time, there arose a great disturbance about the way, the gospel, the church. A silversmith named Demetrius, who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought in a lot of business for the craftsmen there. He called them together along with the workers in related trades and said, you know, my friends, we receive a good income from this business. And as you see and hear how this fellow Paul has convinced and led astray large numbers of people here in Ephesus and in practically the whole province of Asia, he says that gods made by human hands are no gods at all. There's danger. Not only that our trade will lose its good name, but also that the temple of the great god Artemis will be discredited. And that the goddess herself, who's worshipped throughout the province of Asia and the world, will be robbed of her divine majesty. And that would just be tragic, wouldn't it? When they heard this, they were furious and began shouting, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. And soon, the whole city was in an uproar. The people seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia, and all of them rushed into the theater together. Paul wanted to appear before the crowd, but the disciples wouldn't let him. Even some of the officials of the province, friends of Paul, sent him a message begging him not to venture into the theater. They said, they're all mad at you, bro. Don't go in there. That's not going to go well. The assembly was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people did not even know why they were there. Aren't you glad we don't do that no more? Yeah. Me too. Most of the people, they didn't even know why they were there. They're just in there yelling, okay? The Jews in the crowd pushed Alexander to the front, and they shouted instructions to him. He motioned for silence in order to make a defense before the people. But when they realized he was a Jew, they all shouted in unison for about 2 hours. Can you imagine this? 2 hours. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. The city clerk quieted the crowd and said, fellow Ephesians, doesn't all the world know that the city of Ephesus is the guardian of the temple of the great Artemis and of her image which fell from heaven? Therefore, since these facts are undeniable, you ought to calm down, not do anything rash. You've brought these men here, though they've neither robbed temples nor blasphemed our goddess. If then Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a grievance against anybody, the courts are open. There are proconsuls. They can press charges. If there's anything further you want to bring up, it must be settled in a legal assembly. As it is, we're in danger of being charged with rioting because of what's happened today. In that case, we would not be able to account for this commotion since there is no reason for it. After he had said this, he dismissed the assembly. So Paul goes in and he preaches the gospel. He says, there's only one God, ma'am, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that. That was Captain America. Okay. Paul said there's only one God, and it's not Artemis. The message of the gospel starts gaining traction. Churches are established. People's lives start changing. It started messing with Demetrius' bottom line. Paul knew the culture. He was able to reach it. He knew that it needed to be challenged. And as we've talked about many, many times, the gospel is by nature transformational. It's transformational. And it was the transformation of people's lives and therefore the change in their behavior and the way they spent their money that really got Demetrius upset. Because you know, the gospel is more than informational. We know that, right? The gospel is more than informational, it's transformational. In other words, it changes your life, not just the amount of things that you know. And if that's not true, either you didn't understand it or it wasn't the gospel, you see? The gospel is transformational, not just informational. It's going to change the way you live, not just the amount of things you know. And if that's not true, one of two things is true. Either you didn't really understand it or it wasn't the gospel. Because the gospel will change your life. And the gospel will change the lives of those you share it with as well. Yes, the people that you share the gospel with, which you're going to do because you're a follower of Jesus, the people you share the gospel with, yes, they're going to learn some things they didn't know before, but it's not going to stop there. Their lives are going to change. They're going to start living differently. And as you share the gospel, this is what you should expect to see. So how do you do this? How do we do this? Should we go downtown with the megaphone and start yelling at people? I mean, you could do that. I wouldn't recommend it. And here's the reason. That's not what Paul did to Demetrius. He didn't go yell in his face and tell him he was a terrible person and all this kind of. That's not what he did. He did share the gospel with people. He challenged them to change their lives. He did that. And what's true for Paul is true for you. You've been called to reach this culture. You have, as an individual, have been called to reach the culture. And I know that sometimes we think, well, that's the preacher's job, and what I need to do is just get them into the church building and invite people to attend. And do that. Invite them. We would love to see this place filled, not for our glory, but so we can make disciples of all nations, glorify God. Okay? But here's the thing. We're going to continue to preach the gospel here. But you remember what we talked about at the very beginning? How there are some people who can say things to you that other people can't say. This is true of the people in your life. There are things that, yeah, I can say the words to them, but that doesn't matter. But if you say the words to them, then it carries weight. You have been called to reach this culture. And reaching this culture will require you to challenge it. Sometimes it ends in a mob. Hopefully not for you. But sometimes it ends in confrontation. And most of us, we don't want any part of that. Because we've been convinced that to challenge someone is hateful. And it's not hard to be convinced of that these days, because many, if not most, of the examples we see of people doing this, they're not challenging people in a loving way, are they? They're not. We've seen the street preacher yelling at people with a megaphone. We've seen the man on the street interviews. They all go viral, and what they're trying to do is own people with the Bible and prove how dumb they are and all this kind of stuff. And is what they're saying wrong? Well, sometimes. But a lot of times it's the truth. But is that the only thing we're going for? I mean, we want to speak the truth. Don't hear me say we don't. We want to speak the truth, but we want to speak the truth in love, don't we? See, the question isn't just, am I right? I want you to be right. But that's not the only question, is it? The question, if we're going to accomplish the mission that Jesus has given us to glorify God and make disciples of the nations, is this effective? Is this effective in winning the hearts and minds of people to Jesus? And if the answer is no, then maybe the method is the issue. Maybe the method that we're using is the issue, okay? You've been called to glorify God, to make disciples of the nation. So use the best methods available to you to accomplish that goal. And here's the wild part. Those methods will change a bunch of times in your lifetime. They probably already have. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. The church looks almost nothing like it did when I was growing up. I mean, the message of the gospel hasn't changed. But I'm sure that many of you have seen many more changes in the American church than I have. And we like some of those, and some of them we don't. But at the end of the day, it's really not about whether or not I like everything that's happening. The thing that matters most is God being glorified and our disciples being made? Because that's the goal, isn't it? That's what we're here to do. And as an aside, Christian, we are in the throes of election season. I don't know if you noticed. Okay? And there's just something I want to talk to you about for a second. And here's what it is. I don't care which side of the political aisle you're on. When I say this, I need you to hear me. Do not throw away your ability to talk to people about Jesus because you feel the need to own the other side on social media. Don't do that. Don't do it. Be active. Be engaged in the process. Be patriotic. Stand for what you believe. Have conversations with people where you can look them in the eyeballs and have a conversation. Do that. You should challenge the culture where it needs to be challenged, and there's plenty of places it does. But I believe this with everything that I have. When what you post on social media wipes out your ability to talk with people in the future about Jesus, that is not honoring to God. It's not. Even if you're right, it's not honoring to God. So stop it. Because our goal isn't to be right. We want to be right. But that's not the ultimate goal. Our goal is to glorify God and make disciples of the nations. And if social media is getting in the way of that for you, just deactivate your account right now. Maybe that's what you need to do. Okay? You need to cut that out of your life. And you need to stay focused on the mission that you've been given. The gospel demands change from everybody. That includes you and me too. But you've got to love people enough to challenge them to change. You do. Allowing people to go through life without challenging them at all isn't love, it's cowardice. Okay? Because you notice, Jesus never said, I love you, don't ever change. He never said that to anybody. He didn't say, I love you, don't change a thing. No. Jesus said, I love you, go and leave your life of sin. I love you, go and leave your life of sin. But yelling at people on the street or on social does not communicate I love you, does it? It communicates I will love you if you change. I will love you if you change. That's not the message of Jesus. Okay? See, your love of people shouldn't be conditional on their change, but it should call them to it. You see that? Your love of people shouldn't be conditional on their change, but your love should call them to change and live in a way that honors God. So how do we do this well? He talked about how not to do it. So how do we do it well? We do it one at a time. It's hard work. We get to know people. We share our lives with them. We share the gospel with them. We tell them that Jesus came and gave his life for them so that they could return into the relationship with God that they were always meant to have. But they were separated from him because of the sin in their lives, just like you were, just like I was. So I'm not better than you. I just met Jesus first. Let me introduce you to him. We lovingly tell them all of these things. We tell them they don't have to stay separated from God. We introduce them to Jesus. We invite them into our lives, and we invite them to follow Jesus alongside us. And if you have any questions about anything I just said, please come see me today. I'd love to chat with you about it. If you don't want to come down front or talk to me, find somebody that's got a name tag on. That means they're a staff member or an elder here at the Cove. We'd love to walk with you through this. I know this is hard. This is hard stuff. Okay? But this is what we've been called to do. And church, this is how the culture changes. This is how it changes. We're going to be people who love and live counterculturally. We're going to be people who love others well, who challenge each other to change, and who invite people to follow Jesus alongside us. Don't just say, well, just go over here. No, we say, come with me, and we'll walk toward Jesus together. A group of people like that will stand out, church. A group of people like that are going to make a difference. And a group of people like that will bring glory to God. And after all, that's what we're about, is it not? The reason we do all of this is because Jesus did come. He did come, and he gave his life on the cross for you. He gave his life on the cross for me, even though I was still a sinner. Even though I'm still a sinner, Jesus came and gave his life for me. And it was his blood that paid for my sin, not anything I could do, not anything you could do. That's the reason we gather every week, is it not? To remember what Christ has done, to remember the sacrifice that he made for us. And around the room right now, you'll see there are stations all over, and every week we gather together and we take the Lord's Supper or communion together. And we do that to remember what Jesus has done for us. At those stations, you'll find bread that represents the body of Christ, which was broken for you. You'll find juice that represents his blood, which was shed for you, so that you could have the opportunity to come back into a right relationship with God. This is what love looks like. So we're going to remember the love of Christ, and we're going to share that love with others.